Welcome to the next in my series of 120 Nobels. I'm reading all 120 Nobel Prize for Literature winners since 1901. And in this video, I'm looking at 21st century writers, the decades 2003 to 2009. And we begin with the South African novelist John Maxwell, J.M. Coetzee. Now, Coetzee is a South African novelist, but today he is an Australian citizen. He came to Australia in the 1990s, liked what he saw, and became an Australian citizen in 2006. He's quite old now. I don't know if he's all that prominent in the Australian literary scene. His actual background is Dutch Afrikaner from South Africa, but he also has a Polish grandfather and has long had a fascination with Polish literature, including writing his latest novel, The Pole, or novella, The Pole. And he is an example of a modern phenomenon, the literary academic novelist. He was a professor of literature from the early 1970s to his retirement in 2002 in South Africa. And after that time, he came to Australia. But his first novel was written after he became an academic in 1974, and his writing was also influenced by Samuel Beckett, on whom he wrote a PhD. Of course, Samuel Beckett won the Nobel Prize. Coetzee's early work, such as this, Scenes from Provincial Life, Boyhood, Youth and Summertime, were semi-autobiographical accounts of his life in South Africa. And he always explored issues about being in a colonized culture, in a subaltern, privileged but subaltern culture. He explored the nature of the subordinate mind within an empire. His book Disgrace marked a turn in his style from the more realistic fiction, towards a inner essayistic conversation that combines essays, polemics, and memoir loosely attached to a fictional framework. These novels often feature portraits of Coetzee, like the magistrate in Waiting for Barbarians, or the disgraced academic caught up in a sexual harassment scandal in Disgrace, which is also, in a coded form, a reflection on South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Or the elderly, scholarly, world-weary novelist Elizabeth Costello, actually an Australian novelist in this book, Elizabeth Costello, written when Coetzee was in Australia. Many people regard this as a particular one of his best works. He is a bit of a solitary curmudgeon, perhaps a little too self-obsessed, but perhaps that is just an occupational hazard of being a writer. As I said earlier, he knows what it is to live the life of the mind in a subaltern culture, or in a subordinated culture within a dying global empire. And in 1987, he said of South Africa that South African literature is a literature in bondage. It is less than fully human literature. It is exactly the kind of literature you would expect people to write from prison. His early novels explored the psychological roots of the urge to colonize in a kind of self-affirmation, as this remarkable quote from his book, The Dusk Lands, shows. But does material interests, political power, or the psychology of the self determine the horrors of colonialism? Many have criticised Coetzee's psychological approach, but his book, Waiting for the Barbarians, is a compelling portrait of such psychology. It presents a mysterious, doomed third empire in which, he writes, one thought alone preoccupies the submerged mind of empire: how not to end, How Not to Die, How to Prolong Its Era. And that theme is very much one of the strong themes of the Burning Archive, where I explore, or help you explore, world history and make sense of this puzzling world. So if you find this video valuable, give it a like. He was a former anti-Vietnam War activist who was regretful for the disappearance of, I guess, the old left, even if it was perhaps a sentimental attachment to that old left. He was a writer who was tempted, enjoyed, and only partially succumbed to the disappointments of the post-1971 American liberal world order. In 2003, Elfriede Jelinek won the Nobel Prize. She is an Austrian novelist and playwright. She may be best known for her book, The Piano Teacher, her novel, The Piano Teacher, which in a way is something of a self-portrait or a portrait of her family. And was also made into a film in, I think, 2001. I'll say a little bit more about Elfriede Jelinek a little bit later in the program. So let's skip ahead then to 2005. In 2005, the Nobel Committee, after having made a controversial choice with Elfriede Jelinek, who was a bit of a firebrand feminist, member of the Communist Party and fierce critic of Austrian conservative society and of the patriarchy, she was a relatively controversial choice. But in 2005, the committee felt it was perhaps making a more popular, safer choice, at least with the English-speaking world. They chose the British playwright, screenwriter, director and actor Harold Pinter. His best-known plays, which all were turned into movies, include The Birthday Party, The Homecoming, and Betrayal. And anyone of my age has almost certainly seen his screenplay adaptations of others' works, including The Servant, The Go-Between, The French Lieutenant's Woman, The Trial and Sleuth. I recall watching a snippet of The French Lieutenant's Woman being featured as a cultural phenomenon in the early 1980s from memory with the young Meryl Streep in a scene in the television drama The Americans, which I'll be commenting on the channel shortly. It's a brilliant, fascinating cultural history of 1980s American culture. If the Nobel Committee thought they were making a safe choice, they hadn't really counted on Pinter's prickly personality and his discomfort with the Anglo-American establishment and its pursuit of Cold War. He was always uncomfortable with the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, and after the end of the Cold War, after 1989, he became even more uncomfortable with American foreign policy, and it comes out in his more political plays like Mountain Language, where he comments in his own words in that play that the soldiers in the play do get some fun out of the huge range of operation of the American empire. One sometimes forgets that torturers become easily bored. They need a bit of a laugh to keep their spirits up. This has been confirmed, of course, by the events at Abu Ghraib in Baghdad. In the last 25 years of his life, he was more focused on political issues, even though his plays, his acting was fundamentally comic. He opposed the Iraq War. He defended Slobodan Milosevic's right to a fair trial after the NATO wars in Yugoslavia. He opposed the American blockade, the long, still-standing American blockade of Cuba, and he supported Jews for Justice for Palestine, a very timely issue today. The establishment figures in the Anglo-American world did not really appreciate him for it. They criticised his views and they denied that he deserved the prize. But Harold Pinter, who by that stage was very ill with cancer, snooted his nose at them one last time and appeared in 2006 as something of a homage to a fellow Nobel laureate. Appeared on stage, he was an actor, and performed Samuel Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape. Perhaps, though, he remains famous not just for his plays, not just for his screenplays, but for his astonishing acceptance speech, in which he turned on and made savage criticisms of the United States foreign policy. 2006, Orhan Pamuk from Turkey or Türkiye. Now, Pamuk is a Turkish novelist, playwright, and screenwriter. He is the best-selling Turkish author ever, but he has also, and he has, however, at times had run-ins with the current president of Turkey, the current regime in Turkey. Pamuk is very much well accommodated, though, in the American Academy within American cultural establishment in ways I guess we've seen with other Nobel Prize winners all the way back to Thomas Mann in 1929. He teaches writing and comparative literature at Columbia University, or at least did so, and was the writer in residence at Bard College. His novels include Silent House, The White Castle, The Black Book, The New Life, that book there, Plague Nights, and My Name is Red and Snow. He is a critic of nationalist Türkiye. He, in fact, had a legal case against him for speaking out on the Armenian genocide, with which the Turkish government has long denied. He's a brilliant novelist, a really engaging writer. My Name is Red, for example, is narrated by a dead man, which is a bold, imaginative gesture, a shift in point of view that immediately grabs you. It's set in 16th century Istanbul during the reign of the Ottoman Sultan Murat III around 1591. And it features tensions between the art of painting and Islamic traditions, between Ottoman and European cultures. It's a brilliant combination of popular genres like mysteries and historical fiction, something a little bit like Umberto Eco's wonderful combination in The Name of the Rose. He has also written non-fiction on Istanbul, and if you plan to visit that extraordinary city, you really perhaps should check out Orhan Pamuk's memoirs and reflections on his city. Plague Nights, this book here is, I think, his latest novel. It says here it's a multi-million copy bestseller. It's set in a plague in 1914, towards the end of the Ottoman Empire. 1914, I think, approximately that time, towards the start of World War I. Of course, it was published in, I think, 2021, published in Turkey in 2021, in English in 2022. And we all know what happened in that time. No wonder it's sold lots of copies. It features all the dramas involved in public health officials seeking to contain a pandemic. And it may be perhaps the first great work of art to explore the virus that affected us all so much between 2020 and 2022. I've been looking for that first great work of art of that era, and I look forward to reading Orhan Pamuk's Plague Nights over the next year to see if that is it. 2007, Doris Lessing won the Nobel Prize. She was, I think, like a star-crossed child of the late British Empire. And a quote from Doris Lessing brings back memories of those years of the plague, those years of 2020 to 2022, when surging mass emotions affected us all so much. She wrote, "In prisons we choose to live inside. Often the mass emotions are those which seem the noblest, best and most beautiful. And yet inside a year, 5 years, a decade, 5 decades, people will be asking, how could you have believed that? Because events will have taken place that will have banished the said mass emotions to the dustbin of history." Doris Lessing was a British novelist and, as I was saying, a star-crossed child of the late British Empire. She was born when her British parents were in British exploited Iran, and she moved as a child with her parents on to the British colony of Zimbabwe. She moved to London, the imperial capital, in 1949. The year NATO was formed, but she was not so keen on the Anglo-American alliance. She joined the Communist Party, but left after the 1956 invasion of Hungary. Her disenchantment and idealism were characteristic of several generations of post-war intellectuals. I remember meeting and talking to many of those sort of Australian intellectuals myself at university in my youth. Lessing's political beliefs also attracted the attention of the British security state. She was under surveillance by MI5 and MI6 for around 20 years from the late 1940s. When the British state tried to kiss and make up later in her life, she had the integrity to decline the offered honours, a damehood and a OBE in 1977 and 1992. She hung out to get a more dignified prize from the Swedish Academy, the Nobel Prize for Literature, until very late in her life, becoming the oldest ever recipient of the Nobel Prize at age 87. The prize committee described her as that epicist, that writer of epics, of the female experience who, with scepticism, fire and visionary power, has subjected a divided civilization to scrutiny. Her novels include The Grass is Singing, a sequence of 5 novels called Children of Violence, The Golden Notebook, The Good Terrorist, and 5 novels that together are known as Canopus in Argos Archives. Her fiction is divided into 3 phases. There's the early preoccupation with, communist beliefs and social issues. There is a psychological phase exploring female experience and psychological difficulties characterised by The Golden Notebook. And then there is a Sufi phase and a period of space fiction or science fiction almost of the Canopus in Argos. I did say Sufi phase, and that is right. She practiced that mystical branch of Islam known in the West as Sufism, and her writing made use of Sufi tenets, especially those drawn from the writings of Idris Shah, whom she regarded as her teacher. She once said, "I had an inclination towards mysticism, not religion, even when being political. It is not an uncommon combination." And later on in life, she also wrote this novel here, The Cleft, which appears to have been something of a reaction to the sense that she was a feminist icon. The Golden Notebook was especially famous as a feminist classic, and Lessing disagreed and focused more on the theme of mental breakdown, psychological struggle as a means of healing and freeing oneself from illusions, moving on into her Sufi phase. Lessing did not like being known as one thing. Perhaps she had lived through too many waves of collective emotional illusion. 2008, Jean-Marie Gustave Le Clézio. Le Clézio was a French and Mauritian writer and professor. He was, like Coetzee, another literary academic novelist. His novel, Interrogation, Le Procès Verbal, won an award in 1963, back in the era of Jean-Paul Sartre and the blooming of experimental, post-structuralist, radical aesthetic literature in France. The Nobel Prize in Literature celebrated his life's work 40-odd years, 45 years after his first novel, as an author of New Departures, Poetic Adventure and Sensual Ecstasy, explorer of a humanity beyond and below the reigning civilization. Now, he was French and Mauritian, and Mauritius is an island that has passed between French and British colonial hands over the last couple of hundred years. Le Clézio's family is from the part of France that somewhat confusingly is known as, or named, Brittany. Le Clézio himself was born in Nice in 1940 in German-occupied France, while his father served in the British Army in Nigeria, in Africa. He was educated in Britain and worked in America, Thailand, Panama, and Mexico. He married a Moroccan. He lived variously in France, Mauritius, and Spanish America in Albuquerque. He wrote a PhD on Mexican history and the conquest of one of the Mexican native peoples, indigenous peoples, the Purepecha people. He is or was a man of the multipolar post-colonial world. He published more than 36 books, including short stories, novels, essays, 2 translations on the subject of Native American mythology, and several children's books. Up until 1975, his writing was severely experimental. It explored themes such as insanity, language — everyone talked about language in the 60s and 70s, nature and writing, and that was French literature in the era of Georges Perec or Michel Buteau, of Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Gilles Deleuze. After 1975, Le Clézio mellowed, became less experimental, and his fiction perhaps more enjoyable by a much wider range of audience, and he ended up being one of the widely read and most loved writers in French literature, although his works are not so well translated and are not so available in English today. I was able to read a little bit of a work by Le Clézio, which is reflected again his diverse multipolar interests. It reflects his interest in Korea. Bitna, Under the Sky of Seoul, which is a portrait of Seoul and its people, the nature of that city life and how well it serves human interests. You can tell just from the start of that novel what a fine storyteller Le Clézio was. 2009. Herta Müller. Herta Müller was a Romanian-German novelist, poet, and essayist. She was born in Romania as part of a German minority and spoke German and later Romanian. She wrote about the effects of violence, cruelty, terror, and living in a post-Stalinist repressive state like Romania was under the Ceausescu regime up until 1989. Her 2009 novel, The Hunger Artist, portrayed the deportation of Romania's German minority to the Soviet Gulag during the Soviet occupation of Romania for use as German forced labour. In the 1970s and 1980s, she was deprived opportunities by the Romanian state, which operated Stasi-like surveillance of its population. She was deprived opportunities, as many creative artists were in the former Eastern European Soviet bloc states, to work in her natural field of language and was forced to make a living as a kindergarten teacher. But by 1987, she had secured the regime's agreement for her to emigrate to West Germany. And there in the West, her literary career prospered. She wrote an extraordinary, poetically coded language reflective of life under a repressive regime where language itself has to be heavily coded, the passport. But she had breakout success with Hunger Artist in 2009, and it was that brought her the Nobel Prize. Her prize also came in the year of the 20th anniversary of the fall of communism. One commentator said, by giving the award to Herta Müller, who grew up in a German-speaking minority in Romania, the committee has recognised an author who refuses to let the inhumane side of life under communism be forgotten. Without discounting the bravery of her personal struggle long ago, her ideas to me now seem a little bit frozen in time. Nonetheless, her essays in this book here, Christina and Her Double, are extraordinary and give you a deep insight to the difficulties of life in Ceausescu's Romania. The winner of the 2004 prize was Elfriede Jelinek, the Austrian novelist and playwright. She, the Nobel Committee said, presented the musical flow of voices and counter voices in novels and plays that with extraordinary linguistic zeal reveal the absurdity of society's cliches and their subjugating power. Her remarkable novel, The Children of the Dead, has only been translated fully into English in this year, 2024. And its publisher, Yale University Press, described it as, and wait for this, a spectral journey through a catastrophic history embedded in the landscape of Austria, concocted from experimental theatre, splatter film, Gothic literature, philosophy, religion, and more. Jelinek's phantasmagorical masterwork is a fierce confrontation with our fraught legacies in the name of the innocent dead. And in my Substack this week, I go into a little bit more depth than I can on the YouTube video into this remarkable and most striking of the winners of the Nobel Prize between 2003 and 2009, potentially the first true second-wave feminist to win the Nobel Prize, Elfriede Jelinek. So if you subscribe to jeffrich.substack.com, you can do that for free, and you can also become a paid subscriber. But I have some other thoughts that I will share with you more on Substack, so do join me there.